Good morning, everyone. It is a true pleasure to be here, and I must say, Marilyn, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know about Marilyn Fedak, she's a person to get to know because not only is she a force to be reckoned with, as you saw, but she's really an inspiration to people like me who have spent their entire careers in academia where a lot of the pathologies that she's described are institutionalized. Now, I'd like to, as I think anyway, the token professor on the program today, I'm going to address you with a PowerPoint presentation. So for you business students, this will look familiar. For those of you who aren't business students, you'll get an appreciation for what goes on in business school. So if we can, there it is. So I've been given 20 minutes to tell you why Adam Smith matters. I figure that's plenty of time. We'll get it done in 10. Let me begin. So I am a professor at the Wake Forest Business School. And the Wake Forest Business School has recently undergone a reorganization of its curriculum. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you all of the gory details. But I will tell you one aspect of this, and that is that it has organized itself around 6 concepts, one of which is called business in context. Now that is something of a, as you can see, a vague notion. It's a placeholder. What the business school wanted to do was to have somebody come in and tell it, what exactly is the purpose of business anyway? Now that's an interesting thing to want to do in a business school. And it's also interesting because, as you will know, those of you who are business students will know, almost every business school has a course in business ethics. Now those courses, now you can just nod your head if you agree, those courses are typically badly taught, they're not very interesting, and nobody likes them, neither the professors nor the students. Usually they're shunted off somewhere in the corner because it's not really clear to the people who teach them or to the students who are taking them why exactly we're doing this. Now that is a mistake. I think that's a mistake in at least 2 grounds. One, because there really is something interesting about moral philosophy that can be brought to bear on business. But the other reason is that there is something important about capitalism and business that connects with moral foundations. We need to know what that is. There are over 400,000 students who get an undergraduate business degree in the United States every year. 400,000. Now, if you think about, compare that to economics students, there are only about 17,000 economics majors. That is a huge untapped market of people who would like to know what exactly is the proper moral context of business. Let's give them an opportunity to think about it. So that's become my job at Wake Forest University. We're going to see if we can figure out, whoops, oh my gosh. There we go. What does the phrase business in context mean? How can we integrate it into the curriculum for all of the students, across all of the programs? That's falling to me and my responsibility as the director of the Center for the Study of Capitalism. And we'll get this. One other thing I'll just mention. That's the motto of Wake Forest University, Pro Humanitate, for those of you who are not Latinates. It just means in the service of mankind. Now that is extremely important, and I think is actually key to what we're doing in the Center for the Study of Capitalism and in business education. It is in the service of mankind. Many of my humanities colleagues think that the two are actually opposed, in the service of mankind and business. But business properly conceived is not opposed to the service of mankind. It is in the service of mankind. Okay, now let me give you an interesting analogy. Consider the connection between business and medicine. Every student who wants to major in business is asked, why do you want to major in business? Is it just because you want a job, or is it just because you're greedy? Consider the 2 fields, business and medicine. Both of them are professions. They have accepted methodologies. It takes several years of training. They have various specialties. Depending on which of those you go into, one could make an awful lot of money or not. But consider this significant disanalogy between business and medicine. No one ever asks the medical doctor, well, now that you've made some money, you need to give back to the society. Why not? They do say that to the business person. Now that you've made your money, you need to give back, as if there's something about business that you need to atone for, as if it's a sin. Well, if business were a sin, and if business were something we needed to atone for, I would submit to you, as I have said to my colleagues at Wake Forest, we should stop teaching it. You don't say to the adulterer, well, it's okay as long as you atone for it later. No, if it's a sin, don't do it. But that raises the interesting question, isn't it? Why is it possible that there could be something like medicine where even though there are bad actors in medicine, People think that's not something that requires atoning, but business does. Why is that exactly? Shouldn't business be valuable in itself? I think the answer to that must be yes. Okay. Now my training is philosophy, so you'll have to forgive me for a quick second. I want to cite Aristotle. Will you allow me to cite Aristotle? Human beings have moral purposes. If you want to understand what a human being is, you have to understand that they have moral purposes. They're not just functioning animals. They are purpose-driven animals. That's as true for business students as it is for anybody else. For them to feel fulfilled and happy in what they do, they must have a sense of purpose. And that purpose has to connect to something that's higher than just the daily activities. So the daily activities have to connect with medium-term goals, which have to ultimately connect to long-term goals. Well, what are those, or what should they be? Well, for Aristotle, it's happiness, eudaimonia. The Center for the Study of Capital, that's his term, eudaimonia. Flourishing is how that's often translated. It's a bit hard to translate into English. The Center for the Study of Capitalism at Wake Forest is in the process of working on a eudaimonia project. We would like to investigate the institutional elements that are required for human well-being, political, economic, moral, cultural, etc. But for Aristotle, happiness, this eudaimonia, this flourishing, requires a rationally ordered moral life. Connecting it now to business education. Business has to be connected to a humane and just society. So here I'm going to give you quickly the narrative arc, the narrative moral arc of what I understand business education to be. We all want a humane and just society. Don't ask me to define these terms. Let's just assume that we all want a humane and just society. It doesn't matter where in the political spectrum we all want a humane and just society. Whatever else is true for a humane and just society, it depends on certain kinds of institutions. Included among those institutions are those that enable a properly functioning market economy. That's not all it requires, but that's included among them. Now, what goes on in a properly functioning moral economy, market economy? Come on, there we go. Oh, well, let me get them all. Honorable business. Now, if you ask me what exactly constitutes honorable business, it's that business that contributes to these ultimate ends. Honorable business includes industries, firms providing productive value, and the business persons and firms providing this value are contributing to this hierarchy of purpose. So here's the goal. We would like all of our business students, and I offer this, I commend this to you for your consideration, both in your studies or in your curricular organizations, to think about the importance of being able to answer the question, why business? Why business? This is why. Because what I do on a day-to-day basis contributes right up this hierarchy ladder all the way to exactly the kind of society that we all want to have. And this offers a kind of blueprint. What sorts of things should we be willing to engage in as business people? What sorts of things should we not be willing to engage in as business people? Well, we can answer that question, or at least make some headway answering that question by understanding the ultimate purpose here. Happiness for oneself in this context is achieved then by servicing others. That's the pro humanitas. So there it is in the little graphic. Do you like that, business students? We like to put these sorts of things together. Isn't that pretty? Okay. All right, now, I was supposed to talk about Adam Smith. What's the connection to Adam Smith? Oh my gosh, can you even believe that? All right, that's a very long passage from Adam Smith. I don't expect you to be able to read it, although the resolution isn't all that great. It's the great multiplication of all the productions of all the different arts in consequence of the division of labor, which occasions in a well-governed society that universal opulence which extends itself to the lowest ranks of the people. Now, this is a passage right from near the beginning of The Wealth of Nations. I won't continue reading. I'm happy to give you the reference if you're interested. But this is really the summary of the first part of the argument that we get from The Wealth of Nations. That book came out in 1776. The full title, by the way, is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. The question for that book is, why are some places wealthy and other places aren't? It's really the first systematic attempt to understand that. Smith was one of those people who noticed that some places are wealthy and other places aren't. Why is that exactly? Well, here's your answer. You get it just in the first few pages. The book is over 1,000 pages long, and much of it is evidence and discussion of fairly dry things like tax policy. But this is really the answer. In a well-governed society, the production of all the different arts in consequence of the division of labor occasions in this well-governed society the universal opulence that extends itself to the lowest ranks of people. Now, I bolded lowest ranks of people on purpose. Is Smith interested in helping the wealthy stay wealthy? That's not the purpose of the Wealth of Nations. What he's interested in is the least among us. Humanity's historical record has been, if you look back over the human existence on the planet, we've been very poor and very consistently poor throughout almost all of our existence. Then sometime around 1800, something magical happened and wealth began to increase worldwide. Most of that increase and most of the benefit from that increase accrues to not the people at the top. Pharaohs and kings have always had the best. Most of that benefit accrues to people who are below the levels of pharaohs and kings, to everyday common person, and that exactly is what Smith is interested in here. So for Smith, the kind of political economic order that he describes has an enormous benefit, not just for the rich, but for everyone. Prosperity, especially for the poor. Now, there's one other interesting thing about this. For Smith, this indicates a kind of mutual interdependence. Now, some people, like Rousseau, if you read your Rousseau, don't like this notion of interdependence. Rousseau thinks that we should be totally independent, and if that means we have to live like a noble savage, so be it. Not for Smith. For Smith, the mutual interdependence that happens in market economies is a great good thing because it gives us a reason to view others not as potential threats or foes, but as partners. That is a new thing in human existence. It was largely restricted throughout most of our history, comes into existence around the same time as markets. So that's a pretty big prediction for Adam Smith. There's some evidence to show you that maybe he got this right. And what I've showed you here is this is GDP per capita. This is in 2009 dollars. You see how low it was throughout the last 2,000 years, and then suddenly around 1800 it skyrockets. In other words, the prosperity that we've experienced in the world in the last 200 years or so is completely unprecedented in human history. There's never been anything like it. Now, let me ask you, it's a rhetorical question, but ladies and gentlemen, what's the explanation for that? Now, is it just coincidental that it happened right around the time that Smith was writing his Wealth of Nations? Oops, I gotta control this. That's even further. This is going back 12,000 years now to 10,000 BC. If you can't quite make it out, what it shows is that the history of humankind was very poor and very consistently poor, and then once again, all at the end, it shoots up. So it seems Smith might have gotten something right. Okay, second passage from Smith, and I'm only going to talk about two. It is not from, this is the second most famous passage from the Wealth of Nations after the invisible hand passage. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their own advantages. What do you hear when you read that? Do you hear what humanities professors and many other people think they hear, which is selfishness? Is that what you hear? In fact, for many people, this is the locus classicus. This is the place you point to, the smoking gun. Aha! We all knew that capitalism was about greed. This proves it right at the beginning. It's right there in the passage. But if you think about what's going on in that passage, for Smith, it's not about greed. In fact, I'd suggest that for Smith, what you have is something else, respect. Because consider that when you're making your offer to the butcher, the brewer, or the baker, the butcher, the brewer, the baker, and you all have an opt-out option. You can all say, no thank you. It doesn't matter what level you are in society, who your parents were, what your religion is, what your race is. In a commercial society, you can always say, no thank you, and walk away. Now just contemplate for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, how profoundly beautiful a moral moment that is when you can say to anyone, king, wealthy man, so Bill Gates, take the most wealthy person in the world, and he makes you an offer, and you can always say no. That is a profoundly moral moment in human history, and that is built into the bedrock of the kind of commercial order that Adam Smith suggests. Now compare these two scenarios. If you don't believe me, I'll just give you these two scenarios. So suppose you and the butcher were saying to one another, you go into the butcher and you're making an offer, and he says, what you say to each other is, I propose terms on which we might cooperate. Yet because you are my peer and my equal, you are free to say no. What I'm suggesting is that's the assumption behind the kinds of offers that are made in a commercial society. Now compare that scenario to this one. A third party, neither you nor the butcher, says to both of you, I will review your proposed agreements and decide whether they are satisfactory. You need my permission before proceeding. Do you see the difference there? Which one of those is showing respect for all parties? So Smith's argument is that it's the first one, and that that's what goes on in commercial society. So when you strike a bargain, what you're doing is not second-guessing the other person's schedule of value. You're recognizing the other person as a full moral agent who is capable of properly organizing his or her schedules of value all on their own. Because of that, what you do is respect it. You don't second-guess it. You don't try to impose yours on theirs. You make them an offer. So in the first case, what we have is an equality of authority. Now notice I didn't say equality of material wealth. If you're worried about whether capitalism leads to inequalities in material wealth, it does. So what? Let me ask you, why are we worried about that? This is a much more profound equality, from my perspective, than anything about material wealth. If we have equality of authority, if every single person is a full moral agent, every single person is a true captain of his or her life, that's a profound moral equality that's much more important than any sort of material matter. All right, now let me conclude. What does Smith say about why business? So you remember back to what I said about Wake Forest University. This question of why business is what we're trying to work into the curriculum. So what does Smith have to offer in this regard? Well, first of all, it is the only method yet discovered, commercial society, capitalism, business properly ordered by the proper institutions of capitalism, are the only means yet discovered to raise humanity out of its historical poverty. But in addition to that, and maybe even more importantly than that, it grants humanity equal respect regardless of one's station in life. Now, for many of us living in New York, or if you live anywhere in the West, you might have to exercise your historical imagination a bit to think about what it's like to live in a society where you have to ask permission for everything you do. You are always at the mercy of others. In the commercial order that Adam Smith describes, and that I think instantiates the moral vision that the Adam Smith Society, under Marilyn Feedak's and others' leadership, subscribes to, although we are all mutually dependent on one another, no one of us is ever at the mercy of another. You don't need to be on your knees to ask permission. You stand on your feet. Doesn't mean you get everything you want. Nobody gets everything they want. But you are accorded exactly the equal dignity that every other person is accorded. No more and no less. So here's my suggestion to you, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable business leads not only to prosperity, which is an argument that I think now is becoming, I hope anyway, beyond dispute, but it also, in a profound way, leads to dignity. According each person, the same kind of moral respect that you expect for yourself is granting them the dignity that they require as full and equal moral agents. And for Adam Smith, as for me, that is the essence of a truly moral political economy. Indeed, it's hard to imagine what else we could ask for from a system of political economy. And with that, I will thank you.